What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can always follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. I'm going to be continuing my position series breakdown today by going over the safeties. And I'm supposed to tell you that I've got this amazing show lined up for you today. And I'm supposed to tell you that this is one of the most intriguing positions that the Packers have this offseason. But that's probably not the case. This is probably maybe one of the simpler positions for Green Bay this offseason. But I still think it's intriguing nonetheless because they do have a couple of lesser decisions that they have to make. And, you always want to try and upgrade the position. So there's definitely some things that Green Bay could do here. But let's start with who Green Bay has signed on the roster at this given moment. Of course, they have Adrian Amos. They have Darnell Savage. Then they've got Vernon Scott, who they drafted last season. Henry Black, who showed some flashes as a undrafted free agent this past year. And then they have Innis Gaines, who they signed to a futures contract. So Amos, Savage, Vernon Scott, Henry Black, and the one and only Innis Gaines, which is right up there with Ingle Martin, is one of the great Packer names that will probably go down as nobody ever remembering, but it's a great one nonetheless. They also have a couple free agents, of course, Raven Greene, who I will be talking about quite a bit when I get to the linebacker one, because he's, again, he's synonymous with both the linebacker and the safety position. So we could talk about him in either one. I'm going to talk about him some today as a safety. And then they have Will Redmond as well. Both of them are restricted free agents. So that is kind of the area where Green Bay is. That's where the roster lies right now. So let's start with who is on the roster. Adrian Amos, first and foremost. I think a million times over that he is safe, but his contract is still in an interesting situation. I think he's been one of the better Packer defenders these past couple seasons, but there could be opportunity here for Green Bay to potentially extend him. They could keep his contract as is. I would be beyond shocked if they released him. It's not 100% out of the equation, but it's 99.9999% that he will be back on the team. So I think that you start there. You've got this veteran, solid presence at safety. Then, of course, you have the ever-ascending Darnell Savage, who really started to come into his own. And for a good portion of last season, I went out of my way to say, hey, I think the safeties were really playing as the strength of that defense. And I think that held up over time throughout the course of a good chunk of that season. And I thought both of them playing together in a variety of different ways, and what Mike Patton started to use them as towards the middle of the year. Adrian Amos played a little bit more in the box with Raven Greene out. Darnell Savage played more of a robber role, and I thought both of them responded, and both were great with really anything that they were asked to do. And I think you really started to see the progression of Darnell Savage. He needs to take that another step up this upcoming season, but you love to see that step from freshman year to sophomore year, if you will, on the Green Bay Packers. Vernon Scott, really interesting player. I really think that he potentially fits that Raven Greene role as a hybrid safety linebacker. I don't think that you want him playing a ton of just true safety, but I think he can play some in a pinch. I think he can be a special team star long term. And I also think that he has some ability to play that hybrid linebacker position. So that is a player that I'm expecting to take a step up. And Henry Black, this might get misconstrued because of how his days with Green Bay ended. But I think there's a little Kentrell Bryce here. They're not the same type of player, but I think in very similar fashions, they're aggressive, physical players. They play fast. And Bryce started out, looking really good. And then once he got into starting level positions, he just wasn't up to the task. And I think if, Henry Black had to start, that'd probably be something similar. But that doesn't mean that Henry Black can't be a very nice depth piece as well as a special team star in his own right. And I think that that's where Black really has an opportunity to make an impact. But I think Vernon Scott and Henry Black are very much 53 roster type players. So I don't think Green Bay needs a ton of work here after Amos, Savage, Vernon Scott, and Henry Black. I'm not going to break down Innis Gaines because I've seen literally about 10 snaps of him total. But we'll see what he can bring to the table as time goes on. Raven Greene is really, really interesting because, of course, he's played that hybrid safety linebacker position really, really well when he's been given the opportunity. But before I answer it, how many snaps do you think that Raven Greene has played his last 3 seasons as a Packer combined? Right? It seems like he's been on the field quite a bit, that he's had a fairly prominent role. He's played a total of 439 snaps on defense over the past 3 years combined. Now, if look at this as 1,000, there's a little over 1,000 to about 1,100 snaps in any given season. So he's played about 1/7, 1/7, 1/8 of the total snaps, on defense these past 3 seasons. And a lot of that is due to injuries. And he's gone out with season-ending injuries in all 3 seasons as a Packer. And there has been few, if any, people who have supported and spoke so highly of Raven Greene over the course of the past 3 seasons. I love me some Raven Greene. I think he brings a lot to the table. He was one of my highest graded players on a per snap basis. I think he was my third highest graded player on a per snap basis on defense this season. I love Raven Greene, but if you cannot stay on the field for 3 straight seasons, and that's not ripping on Raven Greene, that's just being snakebit. It is what it is. It's unfortunate. It sucks. But if for 3 straight seasons you haven't been able to stay on the field, I have a hard time believing that Green Bay is going to put a restricted tender on him and say, we're going to give you, over $2 million per season when you haven't proved that you can stay on the field. And I have a hard time believing that any team's going to go out and say, we're going to go out and sign him to a deal above and beyond that, especially in a tight cap season because of the injuries that he has had. So I do not expect them to tender Raven Greene with any sort of restricted tender, which makes him an unrestricted free agent. I would very much expect once he becomes an unrestricted free agent that Green Bay will be vying for his services, maybe more of like a 1-year, $1 million type of deal. Not the minimum. Maybe some guaranteed money in there to have him stay in Green Bay. But I think he's earned the right to come back and compete for a spot. And I think you want to pay him a little bit more to try to get him to come back. But if some team's going to go pay him a decent amount, I think you say, all right, you tip your cap and say best of luck. As much as I hate to say that, because I think he's a really good player. But the injury issues have played a part. And I also think, as I mentioned, I think Vernon Scott has some ability to play in that position going forward. And I think you might want to see what you have there as well. So Raven Greene, a really interesting spot as that hybrid linebacker safety. He's good on special teams. Again, I'd love to have him back. Love to see him in Green Bay. I'd love to see him healthy for a full season. I just don't think they can sink a bunch of money into him. Will Redmond, I think, is similar but different. Different in the fact that he hasn't had the success that Raven Greene has had. Different in the fact that he's stayed healthy for Green Bay. Different in the fact that, he's just not quite as good. But same in the fact that I think Green Bay will not offer him a restricted free agent tender and pay him $2 million plus for a season. I'd be shocked if that happened. But I think they'll try to get him back on a minimum deal in Green Bay because he has some skill on special teams. He's well versed and obviously it's a new defense, but with the players surrounding him, he feels very confident and comfortable when he's out on the field. He is a veteran presence at this point. I don't think you want him a ton on the field. And I think even if he got brought back on a minimum deal, I think he would very much have to earn his spot in training camp. And I think either way, let me just cut to the chase. I think it's unlikely that Will Redmond is on the roster when 53-man cutdowns happen, whether it's because they didn't tender him and he just went to another team, or they brought him back on a minimum but realized they had other better options come training camp. So I don't see Will Redmond being back. There's an outside chance he could, but I don't see that happening. So you look at this, again, Adrian Amos, Darnell Savage, Vernon Scott, Henry Black, maybe a Raven Greene. They could go out and sign a cheap free agent. I know Trey Boston was just released. It feels like every season Trey Boston is released, and every season Packer fans want to see him, to bring him in. I've always been a supporter of Trey Boston. I think he would be a nice fit as a depth piece at safety. Somebody who can come in and play some snaps if need be, maybe even play some special teams. But I saw a couple tweets, and I think Owen Reese and Ross Uglum, two people who I respect the hell out of. But I saw them tweet that, Green Bay should go out and get Trey Boston and play Darnell Savage as a nickel corner. I do, as much as I love Owen and Ross, I do not agree with that in any way, shape, or form. I love Darnell Savage. I do not think he has the pure cover ability to be a pure nickel player. I think he can absolutely do it from time to time, and I think you can make packages, some big nickel packages based off of that. But I think you want more true corners in today's pass-happy NFL to be manning those spots more often than not. And I think Darnell Savage has the ability to be a great safety in the NFL. I wouldn't want to mess with that too much. I don't think you can have too many good safeties, and I think it's still worth bringing Trey Boston in. I agree with Ross and Owen and that, but I wouldn't want to mess too much with Savage and make him a nickel corner, consistent nickel slot type player. I think he needs to be more safety and playing a robber, maybe even playing closer to the box at times, but not in a pure corner type slot position. I think they could take a safety in the draft still. I don't think first round is likely, but it wouldn't shock me even second, third round if they invested there because, again, Savage does have some flexibility. Amos can play in the box. You're still probably not looking at Amos being here long term. So I think you can absolutely still add to that room. And as I mentioned, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that they could add a cheap free agent or maybe just bring back a Raven Greene as well. We'll see what happens with the safety position. I'm going to continue the series as we go along. I still have corner. I still have linebacker, edge rusher, defensive line, as well as special teams, and maybe I'll do one on coaches as well. But that is going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you as always. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already and check out today's audio version of the podcast. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.